Jolly good. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Peter Murray. I lived in Bedford Park for 34 years, and in my day job, I'm Curator-in-Chief at the New London Architecture Centre. I'm a Mayor's design advocate and also advised Boris Johnson on design issues when he was Mayor. But today I'm organising this in a personal capacity as a resident who wants to protect and improve the amenity of Bedford Park, of which Turnham Green Terrace plays a key part. And I believe that high quality design of public space, of which streets are the largest component essential to any civilized city. So I asked a number of local architects and planners to form a small sort of steering group just to see how we could contribute positively to the council's consultation on the streets and roads of the area as we emerge from the pandemic. So I also invited Chris Martin and Brian Deegan of Urban Movement, who are leading experts on street design and community consultation, to help us, and they'll be facilitating this workshop today. So public design is about bringing together often disparate views, desires and needs to deliver solutions that make people's lives better. And it's about consulting and it's about creating. And I fully understand that there are widespread concerns at the impacts of the delivery of the street space programme, and there's been much heated debate. But that's not the topic of today's session. What we want to talk about is the future. What will be the impact on local streets of future traffic changes? Low traffic neighbourhoods have in the past been very popular, often because they increase property prices, but they do seem to have raised a lot of debate recently. But do we have to be aware in residential areas around here of impact of rat running if there are changes to local larger streets and roads? Retailers are facing huge pressures today, but also we have to look at a time when we will see more home working, and there is the potential of actually bringing new life to suburban centres like Chiswick because of COVID-19. The changing street scene has to take account of London-wide and national targets to be zero carbon by 2050, policies for cleaner air, healthier streets, and the move towards more active travel. I mean, I do hope that we will come out of COVID-19 better in many ways, a more collaborative and a kinder society, a greener, less polluting society, and the one that puts health and well-being at its heart. And Turnham Green Terrace is, I think, an essential part of our local community. It's a social space as well as a business space. So let's protect what we have, but let's help to make it even better. So now I'll hand over to Chris and Brian, as I say, who will facilitate this workshop. Over to you.
Thanks, Peter. I'll sort of get going in a minute and introduce ourselves. I think just a couple of sort of items of housekeeping for how we'll facilitate this session. We're going to use the chat function quite a lot, so if you can please put any comments you'd like in the chat and any questions, and then we'll invite you to sort of raise those in the discussion later on. Just to sort of highlight that the session is being recorded and the chat will be saved at the end, so we can continue the conversation. So if you don't want to appear on the film, please turn your camera off, but just to know it is being recorded. And as Peter said, today is very much a chance to focus on what we want for the future of the local area. It's not about what's happened before, really, but it's essentially a session so we can co-create a design brief or set of objectives for what we want to achieve in the future, from air quality, planting, play, and business, and so on. So we want to set the parameters by which we can move forward together. Just people to admit that. I think I'll just kick off. I'll introduce myself and then Brian, and then there's a session. I'll start, and then Brian will take over. My name's Christopher Martin. I'm co-founder and director of urban strategy at a practice called Urban Movement, who's sort of focusing on the design of streets and public spaces. I'm also a member of the executive committee of the UK's Urban Design Group, and I'm on one of the United Nations planning groups. Brian, do you want to introduce yourself before we get cracking?
Yeah, I'm Brian Deegan. I'm a design engineer at Urban Movement, so I'll be assisting Chris. I've kind of led on quite a lot of collaborative planning in the past, particularly up in Greater Manchester with the B network, when we planned everything from the base principles of the strategy with the local population. So I'll be big on that. I'll be using those techniques today. Thanks.
Thanks. So I'll just kick off. Brian, can you watch the waiting room just while I'm talking?
Yeah, I've got it. I've got it.
Thanks very much. So I'm just gonna share my screen quickly, and I just wanted to sort of introduce some ideas and a little of what we had to consider as architects and urban designers, and run through what really makes enjoyable places for us as human beings, really. And the position we come from is that cities are good for us. They're at the cutting edge of whatever we choose to put our collective mind to, because they connect us together and they speed up innovation. Historically, Florence gave us the Renaissance. Birmingham gave us the Industrial Revolution. But importantly today, still the great prosperity of London and Bangalore and Tokyo, it comes from their ability to produce new thinking, because they connect us together, they connect people together, and by which they speed up innovation. And they bring out the best in us. And on average, as the share of a country's population that is urban rises by 10%, the country's per capita output increases by 30%. This is essentially why cities evolved and continue to increase in size, to build on the success and innovation and extend it to more and more people. But in evolving and increasing in size, cities globally started to lose sight of this. They lost sight of the fact that we were trying to create a place where people could thrive, and to cater to post-war redevelopments and rising urbanization. Grand urban projects like this were developed. Whole cities were planned from on high, with individual people not being considered or thought about. And fueling these grand urban projects was the latest fashion and technology, as was ever thus. Cars have been with us since about 1905. However, it was in the 1960s, at the time of this steep rise in development, that they really became the poster child of mass movement, and cities responded to this fashion of the day. Cars went hand in hand with cities, but they didn't change things. I mean, they took up more space than their predecessors. They were very hard, and they moved considerably faster. So over time, streets became roads, and roads were segregated from people, and the scale of things started to change to accommodate them. And the issue that this brought was an issue of scale. We moved from a system of designing places like Florence, the entire urban core of Florence is shown on the left, to a system of designing places like Houston. One motorway junction in Houston is shown on the right at the same scale. And the entire urban core of Florence, with its life, community, churches and basilicas, cafes and restaurants, and thriving economy, fits inside one motorway junction of Houston. So we were trying to expand cities to offer the advantages of them to a greater number of people, but we lost sight of what made cities successful, because they were not built around or for people, for us. This is the kind of extreme environment we created in cities, but actually in city centres. This is Glasgow. When we got down to the ground, rather than the drafting table up there, the environment wasn't considered for people. So it's not enjoyable for us. And so unsurprisingly, no one wants to spend time here, or indeed spend any money here. Oddly, some cities haven't really fully given up on this sort of development model. Some are trying to perpetuate designing like this, continuing to shape cities like this, and trying to shape cities to improve congestion. And what you can call extreme cases, some have continued to develop this kind of mesmerizing infrastructure. But closer to home, we see streets which are sort of continuing to be picked away at, junctions flared and lanes added, under the idea of trying to improve of traffic and vehicle flow. And then if we start to sort of look at some of the data, the evidence shows us that this doesn't work. If we design for more vehicles, all we get is more vehicles. And the research has shown that spending money on road projects is no more effective at stemming congestion than building absolutely nothing. A sort of a seminal 2009 study with the University of Toronto compared driving data from cities that invested in roads from 1980 all the way to 2000 with cities that didn't. And their data presented a fundamental law of road congestion, where the extension or expansion of roads is met with a proportional increase in traffic. And this isn't just a close correlation. They found that for every 1 mile of road built, vehicle miles increased by 1 mile. And this is because all too often we think of vehicles, we don't think of us. people driving. And the point I'm making is that when thinking about streets and the public realm, there's a bigger thing at play, and that is cities. As I said, cities offer us there's so many great benefits, and how we unlock these benefits to people and society is what's important. One problem we have is that we don't see the design of cities. We don't see urban design as a science, yet we are trying to save lives and unlock benefits. We see habitat conservation as a science, which is not when it comes to conserving our own habitat. In science and medicine, and we can really relate to this at the moment, if something attacks us, damages us, or if something's trying to kill and hurt human beings, science and medicine fight back to eradicate it, lessen impacts, and put us on the path to recovery. Medicine and science evolve, keep pace with evidence, and as such, we aren't being prescribed leeches anymore, of course, and we're on the whole supportive of that. But with urban design, we do not, despite the benefits that design of public realm and streets can yield for us. And they have arguably remained hidden in plain sight throughout their life, with all the cultural, technical, and political innovation we've experienced in cities. City streets have been in a suspended animation for generations. As you see, Regent Street in 1885, and in 1950, and then today, the cars, people's clothes, they've all changed, but the layout and makeup of the street has been frozen in time. We need to think again about how we shape cities, in my mind. And I feel that how we shape cities simply has to be governed by what yields the maximum return on investment for people, for society, and for business from the space we have available. And if we think about the established parts of town we like to spend time in, it's the life in the public realm that attracts us and drives values. So if we first understand the space that life requires, think about how to establish enjoyment in that space, value will follow, but this won't happen the other way around. And if we quickly think about what we're designing for to create places we enjoy, when it boils down to it, we are soft and we are slow. We move most comfortably around 5 kilometers an hour. When we go over our natural speeds, it's really exciting, but it's also really dangerous. Our bodies can only protect our vital organs when moving slowly. We are also really visual. We need a certain amount of stimuli to stay interested, about 1 every 4 seconds, which is probably why I'm rattling through the slides. And places that are in tune with this, as well as the pace at which we walk, are really inviting for us, because there's loads to catch our eye and loads to look at. And places that ignore this, and we all know buildings like this, the new Apple store in Brooklyn, are normally far less attractive. It's boring to use this street, so we hurry through. More likely just don't walk or sit or chat with friends here. We are also intensely social, something of huge relevance at the moment, I think you'd agree. And we have a set of social distances, a term which is taken on another new meaning these days, but our inherent social distances are relevant to our culture. And these are key to how we use and interact with public spaces. And because we are social creatures, what's most attractive, what attracts people to stop, to linger, to look, is other people. So we need to work with our body's nature to create enjoyable places and places we want to be in. Indeed, if we ignore this, we do get to the troublingly high levels of social stress, anxiety, and loneliness we have in cities today. The places we've created for human beings to live in are not great for our mental health. 55% of Londoners say they feel lonely sometimes, and that was before COVID. And in other cities, 15% of people say they feel they have absolutely nobody to rely on. And the design of our streets, public spaces, and cities has a dramatic effect on our sociability. Donald Appleyard highlighted this in the 1960s, demonstrating that the increased social connections we have when our streets and public realm prioritize people. And the last one I want to highlight, we're naturally really active. We are walking animals. And one of the most important ways in which the design of cities can support us and keep us healthy is their role in influencing our transport choices. Because doing nothing kills over 5 million people every year globally and ruins many more lives. But as well as our physical health, creating cities that invite sociability and community in public spaces are good for our mental health. Several studies have found that older women who walk for at least 1.5 hours a week have significantly less cognitive decline than women who walk less than 40 minutes a week. And this is supported by a rather serendipitous piece of research from Denmark, a study which intended to explore the effects that eating different foods for breakfast and lunch had on school children in the classroom, ended up showing that the way they traveled to school was far more crucial than what they ate. Those children who walked or cycled to school performed considerably better on academic tests than those who were driven to school or even arrived on public transport. In short, the advantages that can be delivered by making places people enjoy, places people want to spend time together outside, and places that encourage people to be active are quite simply vast. And that's both personally and societally. But we have to be committed to harness these benefits through design. Places that encourage us to be everything we are naturally not cause us real harm. in a way they create the sliced white city. For years now, we've been rejecting this because it's dull and we know it's bad for us. And we need to think about of our public spaces in the same way. We need to design our streets and public realm as catalysts for improving our health, quality of life, prosperity, and enjoyment. And on this very point, there's a lot of evidence that we look at when shaping places now. Transport investment is truly transformative. Very few other forms of investment can target such a broad set of outcomes, from physical health, mental health, community cohesion, and urban loneliness, through to combating climate change and delivering more money in shopkeepers' tills. And the job we have is to sort of plot the path through this discussion that yields the greatest return on investment for the greatest number of people in a way that benefits society as a whole, the city as a whole, and the environmental climate that our children have to grow up in. And that's what we must do. And I would like to briefly talk about some of the evidence we have from London, but also nationwide and indeed globally. And we will make this available to everyone for you to interrogate yourselves afterwards. Firstly, when we create places that are more sociable for people, places where people prefer to spend time, retail sales increase. And this particular study by Lawler et al. Found an increase in sales of 30% over time. And indeed, people visit places more often. This is because they're more social places to be, more fun places to be. And importantly, studies by Carmona et al. As well identify that people spend more time on these types of streets. They spend time shopping, chatting, and relaxing. Stopping, chatting, and relaxing, beg your pardon. And this is, of course, important as people spend money when they hang out. The study also looked at vacancy rates and rateable values in streets and public spaces which prioritize people. And vacancy rates go down and values go up when we create these streets which are attractive for people to be in. And we look at wider benefits of creating places that encourage us to be our natural selves. And there are numerous studies reporting that this means fewer sick days for employees, with all the associated benefit which that brings. And in the detail, that means that we are healthier. The Department of Health's own research shows that being naturally active translates to some astonishing reductions in our chances of developing some rather horrific illnesses and diseases. And as I've said, you can have all these to review yourselves, but the story is the same across the UK, with studies highlighting increased footfalls of 25%, 28%, 35% when we prioritize people in our public realm. And the story is the same across the globe, with detailed research from New York finding similar results, and indeed, even in Auckland, studies finding 140% increases in footfall and 439% increases in spending on one street as a result of improvements. Again, all yours to review, but we need to apply the evidence to make sure we are shaping our public spaces to benefit us, our health and our society, and our pockets, I believe. And thanks for that. I'll just pass over to Brian now.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. I will try and attempt to maintain Chris's pace because we want to leave lots of time for discussion as well. So I'm going to go on. Yeah, I'm going to really transition us into like the aim of today, really, to come out with some kind of a direction as what we want over Turnham Green Terrace, really. So how do we go about developing the design brief? I thought I'd first talk about a few things that I've been involved in. We can't acknowledge where we've been in 2020. It's been the year of emergency active travel, trying to get social distance out there and change our streets. These are two documents that I've been involved in. I thought I'd show a few pages of there. I think there's best practice in it. The one on the left there, the street improvement manual, is a lot of the legal stuff about the changes and the traffic orders. Got a few design examples, and the one on the right that I worked on with IVDO gives a few more kind of visual examples. So I'll show a little bit of the theory, and then I'll talk about what we've done just to introduce that as the background for the changes. So one of the things we did in the IVDO document was the importance of a network approach, that you don't ever just do one thing without considering the others. And to a large extent, when we're doing the emergency active travel responses, people were just trying to do something. We had the World Health Organization saying you can't do too much, but you can do too little. So there was a big run out there going, oh my God, people are suffering, they're getting infected, we need to do something now. So perhaps it wasn't as coordinated as we would have liked, but nobody saw a global pandemic coming. Anyway, so we looked at how do the high streets relate to the movement streets, the kind of main roads. You probably able to picture that as a kind of Chiswick High Road with the High Street, more of a Turnham Green Terrace, and how does it interact with residential streets and school streets. So I'll just show a few examples of some suggested layouts we look at. So on a kind of High Street one, this is a kind of resilience recovery based high street approach that we were suggesting. In this case, you can see like from the coloured red on the drawing there, that some footways have been built out to make extra paving so people can social distance. Like cars are still allowed through, but maybe they've been reduced slightly. Some kind of like patterns been put out there, space for outdoor seating. All this extra cycle parking stuff to promote active travel and make it easier. So these kind of approaches are what people have been trying to do in various places. You can see the before pitch up there, the kind of standard arrangement. We might recognize that over the street we're talking about. And they're going like that step further of like access restrictions to provide more additional seating outside, like some market space perhaps. And really, as we come into the recovery, I know we've just gone into new lockdown, but we're still, in my view, in the recovery one. It's all about shopping locally and getting people to hang out in their local areas. The new normal, as it were. We need to change our streets to respond to this, because a lot of people are working in their local areas now, and we see pubs transition into workspaces, for example. All this needs to be accommodated in a safe way. So we are in a period of transition. There's some examples there. On the residential streets, people have been looking, can they repurpose like car parking spaces for parklets so people can like have a chat with their neighbours in a kind of safe outdoor space. It's something that space is a real premium in London, so we need to find ways of accommodating that. And can cycle parking go in there? Can we do something to make it a little bit more child friendly as well? These things have been looked at. Same with school streets. Rather than everybody being dropped off by the car, can we like do some time closures so that people can be more encouraged to walk and cycle in there? And again, you get that social distance when everybody's hanging around waiting for the pickup, or they're doing a drop off. They're not all on a narrow footway bunched up together. So we've got that kind of emergency style response there. There's the kind of temporary arrangements that people have been looking at, and the kind of like a transition into more permanent stuff, maybe around a university or like a sixth form college. We might want to do a permanent closure so people have that space and you get more of that college campus kind of feel. So all these things have been happening in London, and there's some good documentation there to have a look at, and where clearly London's in the middle of like rolling this stuff out. And the kind of main roads, the pop-up cycle lanes have been going in. We've been looking at like, do we need all that space for central hatching? Can we start repurposing it? How does that tie into the areas before? And then some of that's transitioned into a more permanent one where we haven't had like a big network impacts, and well, that can tie into kind of filtered streets with it and extra greening and sorting out the air quality. So again, there's a lot going on, and there's some good practice emerging, but we're also learning a lot of lessons on how to just do stuff fast and how to do it effectively. So in the other document, it showed us lots of stuff about high streets. In this case here, they made traffic like slightly reduced and switched from one side to the other, so it kind of slows it down, calms it down. And again, the use of parklets, as Chris has already shown, to provide extra space on streets. So there's lots of stuff and lots of theory that we're testing, that at least we're giving it a go in a kind of temporary way. And I know that we have been in this location as well. One thing I wanted to mention was some of the stuff they're doing in Paris, which I'm quite excited about, and think we can look at similar approaches as well, which is like the pedestrian priority spaces. That's what piétons priorité. Excuse my French, it's absolutely terrible. And I had to look up the translation of the one, and it says slow is better where that child is. So you can pass an order through a pedestrian priority street in France, and the signs that go with it. And I mean, that 20 on the right there is 20 kilometers an hour. So that's like 12 miles an hour. That's the kind of street. So it's the sort of street where you legitimately can walk in the middle of the carriageway, and you got priority to do so. So a real pedestrian priority street. How do we create the design conditions that would enable that? So it's something to think about as we go through, and I'll bring back to how it relates to it. A little bit more from Paris, the kind of reversing of the pyramid shot. This is like where it goes from like a mostly private cars and a few pedestrians to flipping it where everything's prioritized around the pedestrian and walking, in that kind of healthy streets approach. And they're really actively trying to reduce the number of private cars that don't necessarily add to the economy, whereas you still keep taxis and business and freight rolling. So that's been looked at here. There's another example of a pedestrian priority street in Paris. So some kind of creative, quite cheap and effective like design choice has been done, so people can legitimately walk in the middle of the road. You'll see on the left there is still a footway. You can still do it old school, but like we need all the space we can get in cities, and as we're getting more and more people to walk, we need to look at ways to legitimize walking in the road, particularly during a pandemic. Okay, so far so much Paris. What we're doing in the UK, it's interesting that it's just closed this consultation on the new highway code, but you have introduced the concept of the hierarchy of road users, which is like a step towards like pedestrian priorities. It said that like people at the most risk should be at the top of the hierarchy in terms of like street design choices and just generally the approach of local authorities and society, rather than having like if you're a pedestrian, put your high vis on and stay out of the way of cars. It's like, no, actually you're the more dangerous one, cars. Think about pedestrians. So that kind of road danger reduction, vision zero stuff starting to creep through at a national level. I'll be interested to see whether that makes its way into the highway code. We have been doing things. It's here's one in Poole in Dorset where they did a temporary closure and allowed kids in there and made some kind of creative choice with the chalk footprints there. And why can't streets be fun? And why can't our kids run around and enjoy themselves in the local environment, particularly if you haven't got any nearby parks or anything for them to do to make it active. And here's another one from Dundee, the kind of high street that's been transitioned. Yeah, I mean, make of it what you will, the paint there, but it certainly sends a message that this isn't your standard street to drive down. You're going to have to think about people walking across, hanging out, having a drink, socializing, and you can see they've repurposed some of the car parking spaces for parklets as well, so the cafes and bars can come out there. Again, that looks like somewhere where you'd want to be, rather than the kind of standard like cars parked up everywhere and the 2 lanes and the white lines, all that sort of stuff. So this kind of pedestrian priority is really coming through into the UK as well, and it can be done in like quite cheap and effective ways. Yeah, little word on cycling before we get into the main crux of it. Like I often show this slide. Oh, we know roads are for cars, don't we? Everybody knows that, and we know pavements are for cyclists, pavements are for pedestrians. But where do the cyclists go, and how do you incorporate that into a street without ruining it? Something that I could talk about all day as a lot of my background, but I just thought I'd show a few examples where I think they've incorporated cycling without ruining it. Perhaps like not particularly relevant to the road we're talking about today. This is an interesting one on what was marketing as a cycle superhighway, but really it's quite ridiculous. The unpicked gyratory, it's a great ped crossing. It links the town centre to a library. There's new trees in there. The cycling, you have to really look hard to spot where the infrastructure is, but the space for it. It's quite silly to talk about these things as cycling schemes. They're really like enhancements of the public realm. So I'll just quickly show a few other examples where I think they've done it quite well. There's a scheme that Chris and I have been working on up in Glasgow on the Avenues project, where again, it's clearly pedestrian priority, but there's still other functions going on in the street. So there are nice ways to incorporate cycling within that overall street effect. This is one on Sauchiehall Street. The visualization that we showed, like to show, okay, people can cycle, still space for the trees, get the trees in there. One from Newcastle, you can see a theme developing. Here's an old visualization we did in Camden as well. Doesn't necessarily have to take away from the place, it can add to it. And just to show that it's not all visualizations and we do get stuff built, here's like the final effect in Sauchiehall Street in Glasgow. So things can look quite attractive, even if you include some kind of provision for cycling, I will say at this stage. But here's the main crux I want to get to, and this will lead to a kind of, we're going to do a little vote in a minute of which way we want to go, but I'm going to introduce the concept of movement and place, which I think is probably the best way to frame stuff when we're trying to make a decision about where our street is. So movement and place is like the axis that we put things on, and every street in London's been classified based on its movement and place axis and where it kind of fits. So movement relates to traffic, motor traffic, usually volume, speed and volume, how many you're getting through. It also considers pedestrians as well, of how busy it is, but mainly for the classification that we've used in London, it's like how much volume are you shifting. Place is a little bit more difficult to define. It might be that like there's lots of people hanging out there. It's a place of cultural significance. It might be a high street, it might have different uses. Lots of like people want to be there and gravitate towards them. So they're quite important places of the town to consider. So really we attempted to put all streets, there was like a roads task force, and we attempted to classify all streets in London based on this. So how much movement was going along and how interesting a place was it, or how important a place is it. That you can see in the middle there where there's quite a lot of movement, but there's quite a lot of place functions going, is the kind of high street. And when we're talking about Turnham Green Terrace, I think we're firmly in there, but there's a little bit of a drag towards a connector, which is kind of lesser place, same amount of volume, but it's really like fulfilling that kind of distributor function to get people across an area rather than to have them kind of wait and linger. And then it's an interesting way to look at it. If you look at a core road, like your kind of trunk roads, that's all about shifting as many cars, buses, people as possible. But maybe the consideration for place isn't that important, whereas in the city place, these are like your museums, your art galleries, your key parts of town, and then maintaining that place function, allow as many people to walk and linger and hang out and socialize, is where it's really important. So we're going to come back to that one in a moment. So really, when it comes to Turnham Green Terrace and what we changed, if we've got a high street, what can we do? Well, you might just want to keep it as it is, but slightly improve it. And there's a few examples that I'm going to show now from around London where some greening and some like sustainable drainage has been put in. So it's still carrying the same amount of cars. It's still roughly the same footway, but some of the parking's been formalised, and a little bit of greening to improve the air quality and to calm the area slightly has been done. These are options that we can look at. So there's always the option of staying where you are. But I will say that and it was on that one, that healthy streets, and that's been the big like policy driver in London, tend to trend towards a place. And that was kind of the big dream of the movement and place axis when it first came up. We'd use that to trend towards better places. Let's have a look at this one. So here's like a high street, a scheme that Chris worked on Marylebone High Street, where like we formalised the parking, again putting some suds and greening, the nice high quality paving. So it's kind of like made a little bit of a transition. If we go back to that like graph, we're in the middle, but it's gone slightly to the right, maybe to the point where it becomes a city street. Almost, it's definitely on that board if you're doing these kind of interventions. You still haven't done anything to reduce the traffic in there, but you've made the most of the street that you've got. And in this case, to such an extent that it's kind of shifted it along the axis. A high street transition, and here's another one from Westminster. Again, you can see the parking's been formalised, so the carriageway appears a lot narrower than it would have been if it had been like the full width, like your Turnham Green Terrace kind of approach. So short pedestrian crossings, some nice materials, good heritage, lamp columns, a nice offer. You kind of making that kind of transition over into a city street again. Into a kind of town square. So we were like right in the middle and we started to transition down. So less movement, you start reducing the amount of like cars and traffic going through the area. It frees up space for other purposes. And maybe you can make like a town square, somewhere where people want to hang out and shop and eat and socialize. And in this case here, I've used the European example where they just dropped plastic planters around and suddenly you've got space. And I probably could have used like the New York examples in Times Square with like the deck chairs and stuff, but all that kind of let's make a square out of the street that we've got. It's 15 meters wide in Turnham Green Terrace. There's plenty of space to get a lot of people there. So in this case, they've still kept cars going, but in one direction. The rest of the space has been tied over to work with the shops. So there's a potential transition. There's another one, like from a high street transitioning into a town square. The European example, that you get a bit of culture and people hanging out, and the men can sit there watching and the other guys can play in their band, and you get all these different functions. You can see the parklets. So that, again, that could be cars parked, and we could keep like a full curb heights and traffic running through there. But it's nice to consider like these kind of transitions, and all these things are possible. I'll keep going because I want to ask you in a moment. I'm probably running over time as well. Just to show a UK example, this is Francis Road up in Waltham Forest, kind of local high street. Again, they restricted the traffic on somewhat. There's still access for the businesses, and like people hanging out there, that kid feels safe enough to kind of just ride around in a daze in the road, and it's somewhere where people want to go and socialize and hang out. So that's kind of the way that's performing at the moment. It's interesting to look at the before of that one as well, because it's in the area. If you transition, if you're making the full journey from high street to kind of city place, so you've like reduced the movement and you've ramped up the place, you might be looking at some of the stuff that they've done in Westminster around Soho, where we've got the eating out. Suddenly that's like the place to be, to go and eat, particularly like during the height of the recovery from the first lockdown. Very interesting place. So they've made a city place out of that. Suddenly, from it being a back street kind of high street, albeit still in Soho, is somewhere where everyone wants to go. Like, you know, we've got a lot of there's like a European example, still kept some kind of traffic movement, but clearly that's somewhere where you want to go and hang out. And that would be a special place, you know, with the way that the trees are going now and the social spaces. And I'm sure we all are missing our holidays and quite like to sit down there and order some sangria right now, but we can create that experience at home, and we're going to have to get better at creating that experience at home as well. And I just show like Turnham Green now, I'm coming into land, but like there's also the transition, you get that pull towards, well, this is a connector, this is a route what distributes traffic, it's a B road, we need to think about that. Do you fully embrace that one and kind of shift more away from the high street to get the cars going through there? At the junction with Chiswick High Road, you can see the kind of issues there. This is just me looking on Google Street View, but you can see that lady running in between the cars that are turning, the large trucks being head down there, people being fed in from multiple angles. It's becoming a connector. Which way do we want to go is the question. I'm asking you, I'm certainly not telling you. Just to break that down into a few profiles so we can shift towards finding out what you actually want as a precursor to the conversation, because it's not just me and Chris talking at you for an hour. This is the situation that we've got on Turnham Green Terrace at the moment. There's a slightly wider footway on one side, slightly narrower on the other, kind of retail on one side, some cafes on the other, 2 lanes of traffic that are fairly wide, parking on one side. On one side, there's like a double yellow loading in there. So effectively, there's usually someone parked on the right there, and it gets quite narrow lanes, which are keeping it congested. So that's what we've got. Let's have a look. If we were to transition to a city street, like some of the examples have shown, like, can you spot the difference? There's a little bit of like a suds greening in there, but the big thing about using that space is the removal of like the loading on one side. If we were to make that kind of transition, it shortens the width for the carriageway. You can formalize the parking. All the loading will have to take on one side, and we get a kind of like a smoother movement. You could start like upgrading the materials as well, but nothing's really fundamentally changed about the layout. We transition to town square, like parklets could go in, maybe it reverts to one way in one direction, so you do some kind of like a traffic restriction, the parking remains all on one side again, and some additional planter boxes and stuff to buffer people from like the pollution of the traffic that's going through there. So again, that's somewhere where people might want to hang out. A transition to a city place could look a little bit like this. Again, you keep the one-way working, doesn't necessarily have to remove all traffic. That obviously gives you a lot more options, but if you still want to retain it as like a movement corridor, you can still tie a lot of the space over. This is a full reworking, footways built out on either side, trees going in there. You can still park, you can still get cars through there, but all this space could shift over to people with different like social uses. So just suggesting these as way to go. Or like, you know, you go for that kind of connector, and in this stage, very much like the existing, but the loadings removed on one side so you can maintain the 2 wide roads, and then you can get a lot more traffic through there. It often gets congested when people are parking and someone's on the other side. It's getting a little bit tight for buses to pass other buses and large vehicles. So you could smooth that out. I'm suggesting you could trend away from place. We'll see what people think, but that's an option to consider. So really, like, just want to pose the question, really, going back to that hub. I consider like Turnham Green Terrace to be in the middle of that high street, perhaps like being dragged slightly over to connector, but I kind of want to do a little bit of a poll now, and like, do you want it to stay the same, or which way do you want to transition? Like somewhere like pretty much illogical to transition. It'd be hard to transition it to a core road. There just isn't space there without knocking down one side of buildings. So we're putting the kind of like the city street, the city place, the town square, or the connector. Be interesting for us going forward before the discussion to have a little bit of an understanding of what you think. So I'm going to stop my sharing. I'm going to try and launch the poll now. This is how good we are. So our poll should come up on your screen. Tell us what you think. Which way do you want to go? And then we can actually start the discussion. So it was exciting. And I'm not sure, Chris, whether people can see these live coming through or
I know, I'm
how
not sure either. I've not used one, but I know I can.
But yeah, well,
Point of clarification, Brian. I think Liz has
yeah.
asked, does the same mean before any measures are in place now?
Yes. Yeah, I'm taking it just as it is, as the layout. So yeah, I know there's been temporary measures put in there, but we're talking about the existing before that.
It's about half of you have voted, so I'll just leave that up.
Yeah, well, I'll try not to influence the vote by saying what people are doing early. We've had enough of that over the last few days.
Very topical.
Oh, yeah, some people that can't see the poll. Do you know why that could be, Chris?
Maybe just see if it might be behind your screen. I mean, clearly most people can see it. I don't know if it's different if you're on an iPhone or an iPad.
Yeah. Sorry, someone's trying to steal a vote there. Sorry, some amusing comments coming through. We've been watching it, but I'll give it we'll give it the 2 minutes just to press those buttons. I think most people, and we've had a 65% turnout so far, which is pretty good, significantly statistically significant. And I think what we'll do as well with the poll, we will put it up again once we've had the discussion to see if anybody changes their mind, and we'll make a little note of what it is. So the votes as they came in was we had.
I think if you press end, Brian, I think everyone can then see it.
Oh, thank you. Well, there we go. Thanks, Chris. It's always nice when people know how to work the technology. So yeah, here's what we're thinking at the moment as a group. So 25% of the people on the meeting wanted to stay the same as it was, legitimate. We've got 16% who want it to go a little bit more traffic focused to get more people through there, obviously feeling the congestion there. So we've got 16% there. 47% are into the city street, which is, if you remember on the grid, moving over to the right. So the same level of movement, but we start upping the place qualities of it. The town square has got 13%, so that's moving down, reducing the movement, and keeping the same amount of place, but maybe looking at some temporary stuff around there, or to make it more of a social place to hang out. And nobody was ambitious enough to drag it over to city place. It's a tough transition to move multiple boxes, so I admire the realism of the group there. So maybe we'll launch that at the end as a discussion. So I think are we chairing the discussion now, Chris? Or
yeah. So
yeah, I think Chris is going to start picking up some of the questions, and we'll start answering it. So if he picks it out, we'll unmute you so we can have a little bit of a discussion. We'll try and keep it managed if possible. Yeah. Thanks for that.
Going through the question, was let me find some questions. Some good comments. Question, not many. Is there, if people want to put questions in the chat, that would be helpful. There's a lot of sort of statements.
Yeah, if there's a particular question you want to raise, put it in there, and we'll make sure we pull them out in the right order. Then I'm quite happy if say I want to speak or whatever. We can hear some stuff there, or maybe it all just make complete perfect sense, and we've got some kind of mandate. But the kind of what I'd like to get out of the next 15 minutes is some kind of general consensus. So maybe it's that the people who want the city street go, actually, maybe we need to be a connector, or maybe the connector people go, actually, maybe we can have a little bit of that so we can transition somewhat.
There's one in the chat line of can we discuss the idea of mixed use streets, different access levels at different times?
Yeah, that's definitely an option. Like certainly when you get like a contested space and high streets are one of those ones. All those ones in the middle of the movement place are always difficult because they change completely like at different times of day. What's it like at the school run time? What's it like at high peak times? What's it like with the nighttime economy and the bars and the cafes? And you can adjust the layout to respond to that. Certainly like there's space that could be like a loading, at footway level that could then transition to footway at a weekend where, I mean, you could even consider like a full closures at the weekends and mess around like that. So did Charlie want to come in and discuss that?
Yeah, Charlie, if you would like to speak, you need to get you up. I'll let Charlie come in. I've asked him to. So.
Hi, I'm Charlie. I'm actually a girl. It's just I was thinking about some of the way that bus lanes work. That they've got certain times where they're a bus lane, and then other times when they can be used. And equally, I know in Europe they have scenarios where they have an area that's pedestrianised in the core hours of the day, but for rush hour, traffic's allowed to flow through it. And so I just sort of wonder whether any consideration's been given to doing that, because Turnham Green Terrace, let's face it, is a major thoroughfare, and it cuts off the whole of Bedford Park if Turnham Green Terrace and Fisher's Lane are closed. So to be able to at least use them at those peak times, but then close them off at other times, seems like a sensible compromise.
Yeah, and that provides a great deal of flexibility with the street design. I think that's certainly something we can take forward into the design brief. Obviously, it hasn't been considered at the moment because we're sort of just crowdsourcing the idea of where we want to go. So I think that's a really important thing to have, that sort of flexibility built into a scheme in the future, and we can certainly sort of put that in our sort of summary notes back to you.
Thank you.
Ryan, do you want to add any further points on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's a really legitimate point to make, really. I mean, I kind of introduced it really about changing it at different times of the day and responding to different situations. It needs a lot of work from the local authority to kind of police that and monitor it. And there's some logistics involved in it, but we're getting quite better at it. And with number plate recognition and stuff, there's some smart ways of doing these things now. You don't have to have like 16 different signs explaining it all, or read like a couple of paragraphs every time you're going down the street. So we're getting smarter at doing that, and it's and there's definitely be much more of that sort of thing over the next like 5 or 10 years. So the flexibility of space is a key one. And like I say, the classic example is the loading pad. So like off peak, someone can load on it, and then you change its function so it's an extra bit of footway for the kind of lunchtime rush and for the weekends and for market spaces. So all these things are possible, and we'll make a note that that's been raised.
And Susanna Tubbs just asked you, you've asked how you address the shifting of traffic into quieter roads. You should be unmuted, I think.
Yeah. I think it's a great idea having these transition and addressing how these roads work. But what's happened with a lot of the changes and what worries me going forward is we have a lot of very quiet residential areas where we already enjoy walking, cycling, chatting. Those are all really quite good. But what's happening is it's all now being shifted. And I live in Brackley Road, and all the bit back into the Glebe estate. It's a very quiet, very, you'd see kids playing on the roads. But what's happening is the main thoroughfares are being slowed, but it's just dispersing. Yeah. And that, I agree with a lot of all the stuff that's been done is fantastic, but that is what is the net effect at the moment.
So it's a really good point. And I would sort of take from that in terms of putting a design brief together is that we need to take an area-wide approach.
Correct.
And look at the sort of community as a whole and make sure we're not
Correct.
Displacing vehicles on the different roads. So I think that's a really important thing to take forward, I think, and I'll certainly make a note. Yeah. Thanks for that.
Yeah, and certainly I introduced that kind of network approach at the start, like on my sides, and that's really to make that point, really, that you are considering it all in the round. Like one stone dropped in the ocean will have many ripples, and you have to think about where they go. So yeah, that's a key. Certainly one of the keys to doing a low traffic neighborhood is to block all the routes. You can't stop one and have it like feed into another street. You have to take that area traffic management approach, and we have to be sensible about it. And really, like, we've got like lots of technological ways of doing this now. Really, we should be asking Google and Waze to tell us how to reroute our traffic. But yeah, that's a debate for another time, isn't it? But yeah, really good point.
just asked Nicola Hussey to unmute. She's asking why we can't use ANPR instead of road closures. I'll let her make the point if she'd like to.
Oh, hang on. Sorry.
Hi.
Yeah, just as a local resident, I've been here 20 odd years. I can no longer get anywhere in the same way that I used to do. And I just wonder why, rather than actually blocking the roads, because I understand part of the reason for this was for, to ease congestion in the area. It's obviously just trebled the congestion. Why can't the local residents have the number plate recognition system so that we can actually move around? Because I live north of the high road and Turnham Green Terrace is closed. Obviously, fortunately, right now we've got a water main burst in Acton Lane, so it means that that's open temporarily. But when that was closed and Fisher's Lane was closed, it just meant that the whole, it was forced all the traffic around down Goldhawk Road, down Acton Lane towards Sainsbury's. And I just don't know how we're meant to get about. I walk when it's appropriate, I cycle when it's appropriate, and I use my car when it's appropriate. And when there wasn't a pandemic, I used the buses and the tubes. Why can't we locals just be allowed to have joined up thinking about the whole area? Just talking about Turnham Green Terrace in isolation is madness. We need to be able to move, that's perfectly possible for them to do because the council has all of our details. So I don't understand why they did that rather than just put bollards in the road and close roads and confusing signs.
Well, I think I talked about a bit at the start, like there was a great desire to do something. People did do something, and with it being of a trial nature, if it's not working, you can take it out or add to it or adjust it. But yeah, I think I'm not representing the council, neither is Chris. We're here to collate your views so we can pass them on meaningfully to the council. So I think you made a legitimate point, and we'll note it. But I was just trying to understand why they did it, and there was a whole sweeping view to do stuff that the government was telling us to do these things, and people looked at doing it, and maybe it wasn't in as managed a way as we could do. But that's why we're getting together now to say, make sure we do this, make sure we do that. And like I said in the previous answer, the technology is there to do these things now. It needs a little bit of unpacking, and lots of people are going through the same things, but it's all imminently possible, I will say.
Yeah, brilliant. I'm just going to ask Bridget Osborne. She's asking a question about how do you combine half-hour parking with a more pedestrian-friendly street? But I'll let her make her points.
That was pretty much it, really. A lot of the traders are saying that their trade has been really badly affected, and what was best for them was if people could park for half an hour. So can you see a way of making the street more friendly, more attractive, better for pedestrians and cyclists, and having half-hour parking for people shopping?
Yeah, I think we showed a few examples of how it can be improved anyway if you don't really change the function of the road at all. But it's one of those things that Chris was talking about as well, like getting a space over for different functions so people can hang out there, and it's a place to go, not just somewhere where you drive up quickly and pop into the shops. And I'm sure like the shopkeepers down there will, if they started recording it, would realise that the majority of people are walking to that area anyway, and you might want to cater for that and encourage it. And I will say as well that the national trends going towards more shopping locally, we've got a real opportunity to avoid the out-of-town supermarkets and get more shopped on locally. So we have to support local business. So maybe it's a question of is it really how people are coming through there, and do we maintain that and do we improve around it? Or actually, can we really improve the footfall and get lots more people shopping and hanging out in the area for multiple hours, by improving the street scene? And that's that ties into the case that Chris was making. So yeah, there's definitely different ways of taking it, but whichever way we decide as a group, can be accommodated. But I'd get the businesses to really have a look at which way they're going, which way society's going. I think we've got a lot more home working, a lot of people that want to pop out and get a coffee and hang out and have a little walk in the streets, and I'd be more encouraged to do that if it's a nicer space. And usually we get nicer places, like on the axis, by reducing the movement and tying some more space over to people.
Okay.
So,
that answers one question. It doesn't answer my question. Do you think it's possible to combine parking and a better environment for walking and cycling?
Well, yeah, I mean, I answered at the start of it, said yes, and we gave some examples of how to do that, with like formalising the parking, get some greening in there, street trees, shortening the distance that pedestrians cross. All these things will improve it. So yes, it can be done. It's a question of how much do you want to improve it, and like if you tie over space for different purposes at different times of the day, or maybe you have a parking at night when people are going to restaurants and cafes and stuff, but you reduce it at the weekends when there's more of a market situation in there. So yes, it can be done, but it's a question of how much, and that's why I was trying to pin you into the movement in place. How much do we want to drag it, or do we want to keep it? Where's the adjustment to be made? Because that's really useful for someone like me as a design engineer to go, okay, the local population wants it to go like this, or they want retain like this and improve, and that'll be really useful, I think, for the council and design engineers over there. But yes, everything is possible, just a question of how much.
Sounds great. James McConnell has a sort of point about the sort of half-hour parking and sort of flexible street measures on weekends and weekdays. I don't know if you want to make that point, James.
Yeah, it seems to me if this is a trial, that may, I see most of the family footfall coming to Turnham Green on the weekends. So why couldn't we just pedestrianise Turnham Green just for the weekends, and during the week leave it as it is, run that as a trial, and then we'll see which benefits the retailers most and which benefits families most. If you pedestrianised it, and I really mean pedestrianise it, i.e. no cycling, you have to, it's family friendly, you walk down. Some of the hospitality could open their stores onto the pavements. You could have more cafe feel. It could be a much nicer environment. So that's my point. Why don't we trial both, rather than this sort of halfway house where we're trying to accommodate everything in one go, and it's not pleasing anybody.
Yeah, well, like I say, we're not in charge of the trial or work for the council, but we can make that point. Again, it feeds in. A few people have been saying about the different uses at different times. So this is a part of that. Like the weekend, it changes its function altogether, but we haven't got the commuter traffic to really consider, albeit that's dropping somewhat as well. Can we tie it over to a more pedestrianised, like a market hangout area? There's a few places in London that operate like that. I'm thinking like a Columbia Road flower market, and lots of market spaces around London that does that. So I think that's a nice one to put across. We would, for the people that want us to be a connector, we'd be losing that function at the weekend. So there will be like an inevitable drag, and also with the business owners saying they need people to park, we'll obviously have that to consider as well. But again, it's everything should be in the mix. I think it's a reasonable point to make.
Great, thanks. And Charlie Daly just asked you to unmute. You had a point about Fisher's Lane.
I'm just wondering whether there's a possibility that Fisher's Lane could be reopened, because that isn't a shopping street. And I know, well, there are a few things right at the end of it, but it's always been open traditionally, so they're used to traffic. But it seems that having both Turnham Green Terrace and Fisher's Lane closed is one of the massive problems for access to the high road. And if we were able to sort of have a flexi street for Turnham Green Terrace and reopen Fisher's Lane, or maybe make that a different sort of flexi street, then at least we've sort of got this possibility of getting to the high road. I mean, it literally, from my perspective, the end of my road is 100 yards away from Fisher's Lane. So at the moment, for me to get down to the high road or back from the high road, I'm driving the length of it and coming all the way back. So I'm doubling up my journey, and I appreciate the waterworks won't be there forever, but it's very frustrating that I'm spending more time in the car. I do cycle, I do walk. I also have an elderly mother in Egham that I have to visit, and the only way to get there is to drive, because then I have to ferry around to the hospital. So there are times when we need our cars.
Of course, yeah.
You know,
that's a good point, and I think to me it echoes the importance of that area-wide approach and actually finding out how we can find a solution for both streets and indeed all the streets in the area.
Yeah, I think like the whole reason we call these things trials, like, and I've been involved in a few of them myself, is so you can adjust it and see what we'll have a theory, and we'll think we'll get things right when we're applying an area approach, but there's always something that kind of crops up, albeit, in this case, maybe a bit of logic could have been applied to start with, but I'm sure that the council did their due diligence, as it were. But yeah, like I say, I mean, that's why they're called trials, and that's why we can adjust it, and you try and find something that works for everybody, that gets the benefits you want, and doesn't like destroy the economy of the area or massively inconvenience people. But there's always going to be a little bit of give and take. As an engineer, I know it's very difficult to make everybody happy. In fact, we don't really aim at making anybody happy. We're just trying to reduce the amount of complaints. But like there is logic that can be applied, and if we look at the area approach and manage it properly, we can pass on some good suggestions to the council. So we really like your comment there, I think, is a straight to the council one for them to find out what's going on. But we can certainly highlight as part of an area plan that needs to be considered.
Just a comment from Peter Oborne about the sort of connecting public transport with streets. I wonder if you want to make that point, Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Oh, so I mean, I think the overwhelming concern is around access, as you'll have gathered, and I share those concerns. But I really like some of the examples you showed earlier in your presentation of the shared surfaces, because it does seem to me there are some natural desire lines that could be better exploited. So there's a huge pedestrian movement from the Tube to the park at the top of Turnham Green Terrace, where it hits the Bath Road, which is, for me, is kind of calling out for a shared surface that protects pedestrians better. And similarly at the junction with Chiswick High Road, you know, there's, as you showed in your slide, Brian, of that woman trying to cross with the cars. It's a really difficult junction for pedestrians, because it's quite vague where traffic is coming from. It could be coming from any direction. And again, I think if that could be made more pedestrian friendly, that would be an extremely big improvement in terms of amenity.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really nice, solid thing. And I'm hoping that most people will agree with that on the call, that they're two obvious points that I kind of spotted as well from my quick overview. Look, that really needs some improvements for pedestrians. So that's a solid recommendation we can pass on to the council.
If I could just quickly supplement that, I know we're focusing on Turnham Green Terrace, but I've seen a number of other comments about, you know, that we need to look at this on a slightly wider basis. And I think, so that comment also links through to approaching Devonshire Road and linking with the market space. I mean, I think there's a real opportunity here to turn Chiswick into a fantastic space for people and families without a great deal of expense. But the access issue is key.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, yeah, it already is a fantastic space from looking at it, but we can definitely do better and help the recovery somewhat. And, you know, high level pedestrian crossings really help improve an area for sure. So it's a good one.
Bridget, you're back, and you're talking about the Lib Dem council poll and the idea of one ways. Do you want to make that point?
Yeah, they did a really useful poll, because they've got a good database of residents who they send newsletters to. So there are about 1,500 people who answered their poll, and the majority, I think it was something like 55%, were in favour of making Turnham Green Terrace one way in one direction and Fisher's Lane one way in the other, and suggesting that Ealing and Hounslow might like to talk to each other more about the effects of closing the two at the same time. I forget which way around it was, which one was going north and which was south. Yeah,
I mean, that crept through in a few of the options that are showed in there, just the amount of space that you can get back. We'll say, yeah, is again, if we go back to that area view, it's thinking about what that does to local traffic and the knock on to other boroughs, and the TLRN roads as well are always quite difficult with the network management duties. But these things are done, and that's why, you know, we have transport planners to manage these things. But in an area like Turnham Green Terrace, which, you know, we've highlighted on because it's the most important place, really. That's where shops are, that's where a lot of people want to be in the area. So we can free up some more space for people there by looking at some rerouting of traffic and a different approach to traffic management in the area. That would be a good way of freeing up space. I'll just say that normally the downsides with one ways, particularly if the multiple lanes, is the increased speed. So we have to be careful that we go one lane and accommodate it, and then you will get the whole, well, what if the bus breaks down and, you know, the whole thing's stopped then. But you know, there's different ways around these things. I do feel one way could be a way of tying up some more space there.
Great. Anik, I'm just going to ask you to unmute. You're talking about sort of children using particular streets to get to school, and how Fisher's Lane in particular could be changed to help that. Would you like to make your sort of points? Sure. There. No, maybe not. We can always come back to that. The idea was that Fisher's Lane should be open to sort of buses, cyclists, and pedestrians, because loads of school children are using that street to get to school. So I think it's a really important thing to think about the idea of school streets, and we know we've seen sort of a lot of school streets being developed over the world actually, and it's about just how we can improve air quality and also improve journeys to schools for children and their parents and caregivers. So that's certainly something.
Yeah, well, what we've seen from the response today is like people want to change, like the majority of people are saying anyway, and even maybe some of those that are in the remain the same would want some adjustments and some improvements to remain. So it's a question of how the council take that on, whether they look at the one-way route, whether they look at like a bus cycle only on certain corridors. That they'll have a few options to look at it, but it'd be hard to unpack them today without examining all the data and measuring stuff, all the stuff that we'd like to do. But definitely a good idea. Got anything else, Chris?
I'm just trying to get questions. Lots of good comments in here, I must admit, and obviously we'll be saving this the chat, so all these views can be put across. I'm just trying to find questions.
We'll feed these into the report for sure.
There are questions about traders along the street, and how the street should work well for traders. Julie's put a comment about the sort of previous measures, which obviously I don't want to go into that now. But I wonder if Julie Morse, would you like to make your point, and then also, and we can have a discussion around how we can improve streets for traders going forward. Yeah. I've asked you to unmute if you'd like to make that point. I'm not doing well, am I?
Oh yeah, she said that she can't speak.
Okay, fair enough.
But it is one of the crux of the matters. This is like a high street. It's got like a commercial functions. You know, we need to improve. We certainly want to keep the local businesses supported, and the case that Chris and I are making, whichever way we transition to business.
Yeah, and the important sort of aspect as well is sort of space at the moment, and how we can give businesses space, especially in the immediate term. Obviously, we're going to have sort of queuing arrangements again now, but also space for businesses to use on the street is a really important aspect. And just on that issue of space, Angela Peel, you're making a comment about the area outside the tube station. I wonder if you'd like to sort of bring that up and we can discuss that area.
Yeah, I just find the area outside the tube station quite scary, and it has been for years. You come out of the tube station, there's a very narrow bit where you have to squeeze behind the bus stop. You've got a bit taken out of the pavement outside the tube where cars and trucks and various vehicles pull in and wait there, often with their engines running. Then you've got a big traffic island in the middle, and a taxi rank opposite. And I often see mothers with buggies and small children trying to cross the road there. And the sight lines are quite dangerous with buses coming down and the taxis all parked there. And I just feel like that area is just crying out for more safety features and to be better pedestrianized around that area. So what suggestions do you have for that area? Do you know it?
Well, yeah, well, we talked a bit about the improved crossings, and like, you know, we're not just treating the street as one big homogeneous strip that you do the same thing. And so some places, like, you might want to accommodate loading and parking, others you might want to remove it because you need additional space for pedestrians, and you want shorter, wider crossings to go in there. So I think what you've raised is a legitimate issue, and it's good to hear as part of a design brief there's issues around the tube. Have a look at it, and then when someone from the council, from the engineering department has a look at it, they can see all those issues and go, well, we've got to resolve this. And we think, well, what does that mean? do the taxis have to move? Can we shift the buses? That's a conversation with TfL. And but really, I think you've highlighted an issue that someone else did earlier as well about that crossing up there, and that's a key bit for us to put in our report to the council as part of the design brief. Make sure you look at this area. It's currently unsafe. It's a good bit of information to get from the community and put on there. So yeah, there's all sorts of things we can do. They'll all have knock-on effects, and we'll change it, but most people here are saying that some kind of transition's desirable, and the elements of the street that aren't working as well as they could. So this is a good opportunity to change them.
Yeah, I know Clapham Common tube station had the same problems, and it was a very traditional London tube station in the fact that you sort of alight and leave the building and you're onto a sort of 1.8 metre footway, and then buses and taxis. I think that happens a lot across London, and they've sort of implemented an impressive scheme that has really maximised the space there and actually introduced space for a cafe hanging off the back of the tube stations. They've really gone for that sort of place function over the movement function there, and obviously the scheme was an area-wide scheme again to look at where those things can then go without displacing and damaging other things. So I think there's definitely good precedents around London we can use there. Clovis Summers, can I invite you to come in? You're next on my list. Just talking about the idea of Chiswick Common meeting, Turnham Green Terrace, and the idea of play.
Hello. Yeah, I've got small children. On video. And we go to the road a lot, but it feels a bit like there's nowhere to go once you're on the road. You know, the fact that there is a bit of green space there already, but it's just some grass. So I wondered if there was some way we could make that more integrated into the road. You know, I just look at it on Google Street View and it does open onto the road, but it never really feels like a place to go and sit in the summertime. So is there something we could do about that to just use the space that's already there, and maybe the cafes could co-opt it in some way?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. There's lots of examples of people doing that, incorporating green spaces into the high street and tying up, and some people can do it with side road closures as well to create like a little kind of pocket park or social space in that area. So yeah, that's a really nice one to put in, I think. So yeah, we'll make note of that and pass it over.
Yeah, definitely got.
And obviously, with all the stuff we've been talking about, like different traffic management approaches and different way of freeing up like space, and that would be another key spot to do it. You think, because we're all trying to design kids streets to friendly these days, so they can get out and be a bit more active, and there's a reason to go to places. So that if it ties in with the park there, I think that's an excellent place to do it. So
it ties into that idea of the Marylebone High Street that Brian showed earlier. That example, it's just a sort of the basics of maximising all the spaces and the space that we do have. And on that scheme there, it was the idea of in between. It was a very sort of traditional street with sort of parking bays marked out and loading bays marked out and double yellow lines, and then it was the kind of gaps in between parking and double yellow lines, and there's all these pockets of space which you think, blimey, if that was a piece of land for sale, it would cost a fortune. So why don't we actually maximise that piece of very valuable land and actually make it deliver something for the street? So that was the idea of then, okay, let's take that piece and let's plant a tree in it. Let's make a planting bed out of it. Let's if there's a bigger space, let's make a small sort of seating area out of it with some public seating and sort of start sort of conviviality of the street going a bit more. And it's just that idea of, without making enormous changes, you can really change the kind of sociability of the street by just maximising the space that you actually have. And that's the kind of a sort of one of the minimum things we can certainly look at in the future of any street, and we can put into the design brief of what we're generating here. So that's a really good point. Thank you. Susanna Woodgate, I just need to find you on my list. There we go. I've asked you to unmute. You would like to talk about car ownership and permit prices?
Yes, very happy to. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. I mean, I've often wondered why people own so many cars generally in cities, and in particular in Chiswick. I mean, it seems that, you know, every other car is a Chiswick tractor. But, you know, it's just ridiculous. Part of the reason perhaps is the parking permits are too cheap. Obviously, at the moment, also with things like low emissions vehicles, which is great on the one hand, although that's not always a solution. It's actually encouraging car ownership because the permit prices are virtually zero, I think. I mean, I wouldn't know because I've never owned a car. So we just have to ask that question. I mean, I appreciate many people have particular uses to have cars and if they need to visit elderly relatives, but you know, it just got to be addressed as part of the sort of whole global solution for it. You can't just I mean, you know, I'm a fanatic cyclist. I've been cycling all my life. I love what looking like a lovely cycle lane, but I'm saddened to see ambulances and buses getting stuck in the single lane traffic. And that's because cars and the cycle lanes are taking up the space and obstructing. We need to prioritise reducing car ownership through parking permit increases with, you know, good concessions for essential drivers, and, you know, do something about, you know, that first before we really address how to design streets. It's got to be done in the right order.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of people thinking that way, and certainly like the damage that cars do and making people start to pay for it. And I know there's consideration for, well, there was a consideration for extension of congestion charge for a while, and distance-based road user pricing is being looked at seriously. Centre of London have been pushing that through. So these are kind of big operational issues, and certainly we can highlight that you raised that to the council. But sometimes when the kind of emotive big things like that is kind of better coming from the mayor, and I know that he is looking at it very seriously, and certainly I agree with you on the evidence of like the disbenefits the society if people think like driving is cheaper. And there's I've looked at it with the European Union myself like several times, and the kind of costs of cars and maintaining this kind of driving culture, and everybody's having to subsidise car use at the moment to the tune of about £900 a year each, whether you drive or not. So there are like kind of social justice issues that has to be addressed as well. It's a big topic to feed into a design brief, but I think, you know, you have to acknowledge the operational side of things as well as the actual layout and the design of the street. And we could go a long way by charging the right price for petrol, by increasing like a vehicle exercise duty for the more damaging cars. There's certainly lots of things that we can do. It's just it's a politically hot one, and we need
we've got to address it. I mean, somebody said we own cars because, hang on, to get to certain places is not attractive with the alternative. I mean, that's absurd. We need to be having more buses. We need to be having more attractive alternatives. We can't all have the luxury of having a metal box with a few sofas, you know, stuck inside on wheels. You know, there isn't the road space. We can't all do that.
Yeah, I mean, I know people are starting
to population increasing
strategies as well. Well, like I mentioned, Paris, they've got a private car reduction strategy for the city. Oslo have been doing it for the past 10 years. So lots of international cities are starting to think that way. Obviously, we've got a private car reduction target from the Mayor of London as well, over the next 20 years to like halve the amount of private car use. So it's 20% of all trips. So there's big targets, but it hasn't quite hit the ground of how that's going to change locally yet. But
well, it's the car lobby as well. I mean, not just the car petrol heads, but the manufacturing lobby. You know, we just need to be making smaller vehicles, not bigger ones. Vehicles have got bigger. Where's the logic? I mean, you know, I've even got a garage I don't even use that's designed for a car. But you know, actually, if a modern car, if I drove it in, I wouldn't be able to get out of it.
Yeah, well, there's quite a lot of changes coming through over the next couple of years, thanks to the European legislation. There'll be automatic braking and speed limiting, so cars should be getting a little bit safer. But yeah, no one's putting limits on widths yet, and it is a consideration. And really, in transport planning, we're talking about the transition to autonomous and semi-autonomous vehicle and mobility as a service, and people not necessarily owning cars in the next 20 years. So there's big changes coming to our streets and our environment. So you're right to highlight them. It's tricky how to fit that through to a design brief at the moment. At the moment, people are just putting electric car charge points in as the response, but there's a lot more we have to do to the streets to accommodate these changes.
We can definitely take forward the idea of sort of reviewing pricing structure as a design brief, and that's a sort of a discrete element which we can certainly include in the brief for now. So I think it's a good point, well made. So thank you for that input.
Sure.
Nigel, thank you. Yeah, Nigel, I've only got you as Nigel Arkley, I'm afraid, but I'll ask you to unmute to make your point. I can see you trying to, so I'll wait. Yeah, it should be you now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hi. I live in Elliott Road, been here for a long time, and very much in favour of what goes on in the terrace, and I feel very sorry for the traders at the moment. The idea I had, perhaps in the short term, maybe if you could traffic light part of the terrace so that you can continue north and south alternatively.
What? Sorry, yeah. Can you define what you mean by the end bit? Continue.
Well, so I mean, I suppose it's like a glorified roadworks, but I mean, you could have north going for 5 minutes and then south going for 5 minutes without
like a giveaway to oncoming vehicles.
Yeah.
Got you.
It's a short-term solution to perhaps a difficult problem, but I would envisage the whole thing paved with parking either side and bus bays, perhaps one bus bay rather than the two. All sorts of ideas like that. But I mean, the traffic light might just help for the short term.
Yeah, so yeah, the give way and turn and traffic light control that will like slow cars down for sure, but it'll also reduce the volume. So like I know I keep dragging, probably labouring the point, but like you're shifting down the movement access by accommodating something like that. So if that's that's the way we want to go. There's different ways of getting about it, that by keeping the same layout but reducing the throughput through traffic signal. Is definitely something that can be done and we can put through as an option.
But if you take that a stage further, it would allow a sort of central corridor for the traffic. Alternatively, it would allow access for parking, access for people, and that could be very carefully planned.
Yeah, and I think that's like in line with what I believe the council's approach was during the emergency, to allow kind of access only for people, but maybe that's a slightly stronger restriction than the one you're suggesting, which just kind of limits the flow in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know it puts the problem further down, but if you want to retain the integrity of the terrace, that would be my initial thought to help the debate forward. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a really good idea, and there's lots of techniques we can use in that regard. Like sometimes it can come down to just like limiting the throughput into it from the main road. So you shorten the time that traffic can filter into it, can have a real effect on the road. So there's all different ways we can manage it, even if you're not like strongly restricting it. But,
yeah, that's something we'll take forward to the design brief. Lots of questions about traders, and I wonder if I could ask for John Fitzgerald to make your point that you've got in the chat there.
Hi there. Sorry, I was just about to type. I have to go. I'm leaving.
Oh, good timing.
Very good timing. Bear with me. Yes, I'd just like to say, I would think we all have to accept that there will be radical changes coming to both transport and street systems around Chiswick and roads. I suppose the issue I have is knowing that this will happen or is going to happen at some point in the future. We have to accept it's going to happen and do the best we can to make the transition as easy and logical as possible. One of the problems that happened with the current system is it all came together. COVID, the C9 system, and then the street closures. That long term has had a massive knock-on effect for all of us. And a lot of the problems you see are not specifically Green or Devonshire Road closures. There are a wider range of problems in Chiswick Road. I think realistically speaking, my view would be, if we know we have to do this, to do it in a controlled way, to trial and see what the best systems would be for the area, and to improve the communication between the council and Transport for London and residents and traders. I think everybody would listen to the conversation we've had today and think it would be lovely to have pedestrianised streets and people running around outside our shops, etc. I don't think anybody's got an issue with that. but the practical issues for residents and for traders need to be taken serious, and trying to hamstring everything together in one batch production or one batch change has got everybody in the wrong frame of mind on this. That's basically my view. Basically what I'm saying is, I think we all accept that there will be changes. I'm perfectly happy to trial change. I think it's a great idea to trial changes. And I think if it was to be trial on either a one-way system or a weekend pedestrianisation, and see what the results are. That would be my view.
Yeah, that's great. It's almost like the definition of engineering, that you manage change in the least damaging way possible. That's kind of the way I've often looked at my career, and I think that's really sensible. We can get so far planning, but yeah, that testing of stuff and seeing it work. So we look at what the council have done as like, well, we tested that. These are the repercussions. Okay, how do we adjust it? What's the next thing? What are people actually asking for in the local area? And that's why we're trying to get this engagement side of things going now. But I thought everything you said was spot on. Thanks for that, John.
Thank you
very much. Yeah. Right, just trying to. Again, loads of really good comments on here. Working through to a question.
What time are we running to, Chris? Because I'd quite like to do.
It's the 12 o'clock. I think we're
okay.
Session.
Yeah, let's keep the conversation going then. Yeah.
Lots of questions about sort of residence parking and the idea of aligning residence parking according to the size of the car, which it could be an interesting one. Bus lanes. Lots of comments. Bear with me.
Yeah, well, it's completely legitimate to, if we spark your interest, to get a comment down. We'll make sure it sees its way into the report, so the council can be informed on this. So, yeah, we'll legitimately do that. Not everybody wants to talk out in public. I understand that.
Yeah. Is there one about sort of? I presume it's associated with removing some parking and having a multi-story. Nicola Hussey, I'll let you make that point.
Sorry, I've made lots of points. Which point?
Sorry, I'm on the one about a multi-story car park at Sainsbury's.
Oh yeah. I mean, at the moment, we can't actually get to Chiswick to do our shopping, to help the local traders by going in this shop, that shop, the other shop. How most people used to operate in the area is that there was 30 minutes parking in Turnham Green Terrace and 30 minutes in Devonshire Road. So, you know, I'd go from one place to another, and when it was getting too heavy, I'd put it in the boot of my car, I'd go and take my my dry cleaning to Top Hat. I'd go to the Mackens, I'd go to the Covent Garden Fishmongers, and I'd pick up lots of things, and I'd maybe have a coffee, So at the moment we can't get there on foot, so you're very limited as to what you do. So, you know, online shopping's the way, but obviously that's still vehicles coming to you, still blocking the roads. We've got a huge site at Sainsbury's, a massive car, like a floor space. If they made that into a multi-story car park, at least we could get there. That's so close to the high road, as everybody knows. That's where the problem is at the moment with the water main, and then we could walk freely up and down the high road, get to all the local shops. And I just think, I don't understand why that isn't being considered as an option. And I saw on the chat, lots of people were saying, yeah, great idea. We need more parking, but kind of in the periphery, not so that we can kind of, like they have, outside of London where you have park and ride. So, you need to kind of you need to be able to get there in order to shop there. And we can't get there at the moment.
Yeah, I mean,
so the Sainsbury's site, so it'd have to be multi-story. You're talking about building on top of the supermarket.
No. The car park at the moment is just on ground level. So you don't know Chiswick then?
I don't know.
Okay, the car park at the moment is ground level. So you could do an underground car park if it was offensive to have it above ground. You could do a multi-story. It's a huge car park, but it's just on one level. It's an open air car park. but it's so close to the high road.
Sorry.
What's the occupancy like in the car park? Sorry to ask you all technical ones. Is it, like, is the car park always full? Or is it just for Sainsbury's customers?
It's just for Sainsbury's.
No, it's not for Sainsbury's customers. Well, you can pay there and stay for a couple of hours.
I think the important one for me is I think it's in a principle-based view. It's a good one in terms of lots of developments around the world have a sort of peripheral parking, which means you can then have lots of different interventions inside the sort of core, where you can sort of have people walking around and spending more time on streets and have sort of quieter streets to allow children to play in and more greening. That in itself is a useful thing which we can take forward to the design brief in terms of how can we maximize peripheral parking to make more space in the centre. I don't know who owns the Sainsbury's car park. I don't know if you do. If it's Sainsbury's, obviously they might want to. They might have other ideas.
Well, they'll get huge revenue, though, won't they? If we're all using it.
Well, they probably might want to put some apartments on there as well.
That's exactly what's going to happen. They're going to bring more people into the area with more cars. So, rather than that, let's stop the building of more houses and provide parking for the residents that currently live here, so that we can use the local shops, use the local restaurants. Yeah, as I say, we used to be able to do that with Turnham Green Terrace and Devonshire Road. You could park there anyway, but that's gone. So there needs to be an alternative, in my view.
Thanks. Yeah, your point is valid. The idea of peripheral parking to maximise space in the core is a really good one to take forward. So, obviously we're all in a situation where we need to be building more housing. So I don't think we can say we can't build houses, but definitely the idea of maximising peripheral parking to open up spaces in the core is a great point.
Okay.
Don't know if you had anything further to add, Brian?
Yeah, I was just looking at the comments about that. Was kind of what I was asking, like, how full is that car park? Could it be utilised in a different way now? Could the council enter some negotiations so it's not just for Sainsbury's customers, or maybe there's some kind of like a, I don't know, like subsidy for local residents to keep them off the high street as a result of changes that would come on the street. That there might be all sorts of discussions like that could be happening, but if there's space to park a car and it would like act as a peripheral car parking space to free up space in the main area, then that's definitely worth looking at. So yeah, there's a few people saying it's never full, so we got space there and we got somewhere to put people's cars, not necessarily on high street, which would open up the area for more walking trips. So yeah, I think that's a really good one to feed through. And thanks for the comments in the chat, confirming that, everyone.
Brilliant. Andrea, you made a point about weekend pedestrianisation, the idea of sort of having sort of events, sort of more sort of town or community events like a flower market and things. Do you want to mention that point and speak about it?
I can do. Am I there?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, I love that when it happened a few times, it worked very well. I also know Walthamstow, and there was a lot of resistance, as far as I know, from the traders there, and that then disappeared after a few months, because they realized a lot of people were coming into the area just for the relaxed atmosphere on that street in Walthamstow. Yes, I agree with everything about the car ownership, the largeness of the cars, and that it's ruining our area. And I'd love something to be done. And I think you're being very brave presenting solutions. Thank you.
Thanks for the point. I think it's really important to think about the sort of what else we can actually ask of our streets. I think it's an important point about we accept the sort of status quo a lot on streets, and actually we can use our streets and public spaces for a great deal of things. And the idea of having sort of temporary closures and flower markets is a really beautiful idea, and certainly something we can take forward into the idea of to build on in the brief of a timed approach, and how we can use some of those some of the downtime, as it were, when we have a situation like that.
That's gone.
You right, Brian? Oh, I think Brian complaining about his internet. just linked to that, I see that there's a point from Karen in the chat about when Turnham Green Terrace was closed for the festival last year, the bus route was rerouted down to Stamford Brook, not Fisher's Lane. I think maybe something we can take into the design brief as well, about the idea of looking at routing and how that's carried forward. Just looking for other questions. Peter Eversden, you're talking about more sort of local access buses. I'll ask you to make that point if you don't mind. No, I don't think he's there. But so Peter's basically making the point that he's saying we need some minibuses running around the area, rather than having sort of all sort of private vehicles and sort of larger buses to take people to where they need. It's certainly a point of consideration we could take forward. Oh, Brian, you're back. Very good. And there you go. Have we forgotten to walk? John making a point about sort of walking in the area. I'm afraid I just have you as John, but I can ask you to unmute and see if you want to talk about walking in the area in general.
Hello. Yeah. Yeah. I was sort of interested by this idea of the 15-minute city that's talked about in Paris by the mayor there. And I sort of started looking at the map around, I live in Grove Park, and looking around this area. And it's amazing how many businesses are within a 15-minute walk. I mean, you know, businesses, doctors' surgeries, vets, restaurants. You know, there's actually no reason, although I do go up to the High Road a lot, and I normally go for lunch on Devonshire Road or Turnham Green Terrace, shop on the High Road. I normally walk or cycle. And it just struck me that Chiswick is actually, you know, for most of us where we live, we're already in a 15-minute city. And so the idea that we need to drive a few hundred yards to get to the High Road, it's just a nonsense. Now, clearly, you know, there's something potentially to be done with parking around Sainsbury's so that people can come out from outside the area. But Chiswick is also incredibly well served by public transport. We've got, what, three tube stations within 15 minutes walk of the High Road, or even less. We've got buses running all the way through, and admittedly there's a problem with that at the moment with the congestion and the roadworks. So, you know, I think we need to sort of rethink how we're using Chiswick, how we're getting and how we're getting around. I don't think making more parking spaces is really is the way to go at the moment. But I really like the ideas that you've presented for Turnham Green Terrace. I think we should be thinking about Devonshire Road, and I think if you did the survey for Devonshire Road, you would find the ideas and the thinking maybe shifting further to the right on the chart.
Yeah, I think we were kind of hinting that if the Sainsbury's car park could be utilised more, then some of the parking could be removed from the main roads to free up space for walking and different functions. So I think that's the way we were leaning on that one. And also I think the point about the connections onto the High Road was for onward journeys that that people have to go there. But I still get your general point that, you know, generally we all have to think about limiting our car use, and that's really how we're going to get the most benefit out of the area. So yeah, just to clarify them.
Yeah, and I think the point really is the compactness of Chiswick already as a town centre. It really lends itself to you know, getting around on our feet. Now, you know, obviously that doesn't apply to everyone, and I think we need to free up the roads for the people that do need to drive, free up the roads to allow buses through, to allow ambulances through, you know, and I think that's all about those of us who don't need to drive, not driving. Maybe I could just make one more point. Turnham Green Terrace needs the tube needs a lift, because none of the tube stations provide step-free access. So I think that's an issue as well for wheelchair users.
That's a very important point. Thanks. And I think the idea of the 15-minute neighbourhood you raise is a really interesting one as well, because obviously it kind of focuses around sort of two themes of land use planning and transportation. And as you rightly say, the area is on the money in terms of the land use planning. Everything you really could need is within a short walk. And I think the idea that the transport isn't actually supporting but land use planning in that respect, because if people aren't feeling they want to walk to these places, then obviously the transportation element is failing in a way. So that's something to focus on. To actually, how do we encourage people to walk, and that essentially make it more pleasant, and then that actually then starts to support the idea of land use planning and that sort of starts to level up in that respect as well. So it's a really interesting point, and well made. Thanks for that.
How are we doing?
Good. Just going through some questions. Lots of agreement with different points, which is very good, which we can report back on. And the Sainsbury's car park certainly getting a lot of attention.
It feels like we're not getting a huge amount of kickback on certain suggestions, and we're kind of wobbling our way towards like some kind of overall recommendations, which is it's really where I'd like it to go. I'd also like to get some kind of even if it's begrudging, a consensus going on there, about how the streets. And there's some themes that everybody's picking up on, maybe with slightly different solutions and responses, but we're definitely honing in on some quite useful information to form the design brief and to pass on to the council. So yeah, thanks for all your help in this. I think it's going well. And we can see that.
There's a good technical question for you there, Brian, from Peter. I've just asked everything to unmute. It's about if we get wider pavements, Turnham Green Terrace, which will inevitably narrow traffic lanes, how can we ensure that deliveries can be arranged still?
Yeah, does you want to ask, or I can just answer?
I've asked him, but maybe just answer, because I have read his question out and he hasn't unmuted yet. So.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, I talked about it a bit before with the loading pads, and I'll just define what on earth we mean by that. And I do use a bit of jargon as an engineer, but basically you can do loading at the kind of footway level rather than at the carriageway level, and time it at certain times so that when people have to load and you have to bring stuff in for the shops, otherwise how do those goods get there? They can use that space, but at certain times or certain frequencies when they're not there, it's additional footway for people to walk on. And it's certainly, and when we do have contested space, or there's lots of different uses going on, it's a common technique we use right across London, particularly in the city of London. It's hard to find a car parking space that is at carriageway level there. It's a real go-to one. So that's one ways of managing it. And then it can look like the actual the asphalt that's left, the tarmac can look a lot narrower when you see it's an easier street to cross, and it feels a little more people friendly, and but you've still got that purpose of the reinforced section of the footway that people can park a van on and load on. So I think there is some flexible options. I mean, it requires good management from the local authority, but it's such a nice area that you'd expect the compliance to be quite high. So that's one way of going about it. Also, I mean, I worked on the Olympics when we shifted all to nighttime loading and stuff. There's all sorts of different operational methods you could use where you just have the wider footway altogether, and you ask people to do most of their loading outside of the peak hours, be it early morning, at night, during the day, at not times at school runs or lunchtime. But there's all sorts of different ways we can manage our spaces better if we really get on top of it. And it's clearly a well-loved street, and I'm sure the council would be open to that sort of thing. So there are options if we want to get space. We can look at it's the space and time thing that we're looking at it. Different space can be used by different people at different times of the day if we're really tight with our management.
Thanks, Brian. I think there's a view from a trader here. Daniel Hunt, can I ask you to make your point as a trader of windfall natural, I think?
Yes, certainly. Thank you very much. I mean, mainly, we're all concerned about the road closure, and we did a quick poll of traders on Turnham Green Terrace, and 90% of the managers or owners who are available to comment were very strongly of the opinion that the measures as they were imposed would be pretty disastrous for business going forward. There were a number which were uncontactable, and there were, I think, 3 hospitality outlets, mainly who were in favour of the road closure because they felt that in the summer they like to have their windows open and they felt it would be a better environment for their customers. But pretty much every other, certainly all the retailers were very strongly against it. If we, some of these ideas about having part of the pavement extended on one side and these delivery pads, as we were just hearing, Brian was mentioning, these sound like constructive, interesting ideas, to go forward. But it's the other issue is a lot of us feel that we're sort of collateral damage in this, in that we've all agreed long rent leases, for many years to come, and those are, it's quite a commitment anyway, especially in these COVID impacted times. But where you suddenly have a situation where the council unilaterally changes the very nature of the street, where you've done these long deals years into the future, part of us feel it's a tough situation. It's very unfair. If the whole of Chiswick, including our other competitors, were if it was a level playing field, that would be different. But we feel that certain streets have been singled out, and we will then have to go and apologies for the noise here. We've got a leaf blower just started up, but we would have to go back to our landlords and be in a very tricky legal situation of having to argue that the leases were no longer stood because the nature of the street had changed so dramatically, or perhaps looking for compensation from the council for the drop in footfall and traffic. So these are some of the issues that have come up from conversations on the street recently.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, I mean, go on, Chris. Sorry.
Yeah, I was obviously we're sort of haven't been sort of proposing anything as part of this, and the idea of a street closure is noted. And I think the other ways of sort of maximising footway and sort of these other smaller measures that Brian was talking about are certainly ways we can help improve the environment for traders. Is there anything in particular you think would benefit you as a sort of as a collective rather than at your individual store? But what do you think is what do you see as beneficial to improving the trading environment on the street? And I'm talking sort of everything from more seats, more trees, more planting, more sort of spaces, sort of maximising places to sort of sit and congregate, or the other elements of sort of more parking and more connectivity. Where do you sort of see the sort of benefits lying?
Well, I think there's perhaps 2 parts to it. One is a lot of us noted an improvement, and we felt it was good for business when the 15-minute free parking or half an hour free parking was introduced. But one part of this is that I think we all accept that people shouldn't be making car journeys where they can possibly avoid it to go shopping locally in Chiswick. We sell natural organic products and eco-friendly products. I cycle around, and we're very much, we don't think this is the future at all. This is kind of the view, talking to people on the street, traders. But at the same time, whatever measures are that we work towards to encourage people to walk more and cycle more, they need to be done across the whole area and with the consent of and constructively with the consent of the traders. We feel very much that singling out certain streets like Turnham Green Terrace, we feel like it's helping our competition. There are even within Chiswick there's competition, and there are things that are available elsewhere in Chiswick closer to parking, and we know that it will be attractive for our customers to. It'll be easier for some of them to get to these places. So I think widening the pavements or pavement on one side and looking at limited parking for certainly disabled parking, and these delivery pads would probably be well received from what I can gather.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, and I just add, like, you know, it's obviously vital on a high street, which has got all this retail function, for you to kind of lead the way on it, really. And I'll just say some of the boldest, like most transformational things done in London have been led by business improvement districts, particularly you know, and local businesses getting together and saying, here's what we want. Some places have made that link to the increased footfall from, like, improving the streets, and the stuff you're saying is fully within, like, the remit there. So street improvements will, we hope, improve your business. That's one of the main things we're doing it on the high street. We want more people to walk there and cycle there and improve there and have easier access there. And you know, at the moment, you probably are being somewhat blighted by the amount of through traffic that's going, because it's fulfilling this kind of connector function. So anyway, like, that's the point we'll be making to the council, really, to engage with you. And for me, the most positive things come when you lead it. And so, you've said really sensible things there, and that's great. The business voice is so important on a high street. The businesses are saying, this is what we want. We hear all the options. We think this would be great and improve our business on the high street. That's a really powerful voice to local authorities. So thanks for your contribution. I think it's very positive.
Yeah, thanks very much. Just a comment from Jeremy Day, if I can find you on my list and ask you to speak. The idea of the sort of vibrancy of Turnham Green Terrace since the Acton Lane detour. I wonder if you'd like to make that point and come in. Yeah.
You can hear me. You can't see me. There we are. Yeah. Well, yeah. I think it would be most people that know the street well would recognise the comment I made. I think, can I also just take the opportunity to make a separate point, which someone's just picked up on, which is the point I tried to make a little earlier as well, which is around, I'm not sure how we can design the future of the street without knowing what we want the street to be. And I make that in the context of the use classes order changes that are happening presently. So now most people will know shops can now be used for a much wider range of uses. So it's much easier now to run a bank or an estate agent, to run a restaurant, to run a gym, to run a physiotherapy studio from a shop. You know, things that have quite major impacts on the way that streets get used. And recently we've let, some of you will have noted, we've let 1A Devonshire Road to a spin studio that was formerly a shop. You know, and these make changes to the way streets are used. So I think these experimental traffic orders have been implemented in Chiswick in a fairly sort of sweeping way. And I think there needs to be more sort of master planning about what we want Devonshire Road to be, what we want the High Road to be, and what we want Turnham Green Terrace to be, because, you know, ultimately it can't all be hospitality. And a lot of it will go to hospitality, cafes and restaurants if we don't if we don't design in some reasons for that not to be the case. And you know, I think we need to see retailers that you know, do need people to be able to stop and park, pick stuff up, heavy items, or you know, nice pieces of furniture or art, or the types of shop that we want to see on the streets. You know, and if we make it impossible for people to stop and use those shops, they will have to go. So I'd like to see much more sort of strategy about the design of the street, and then or you know, the design of the street leading the way that the streets get used.
Thanks, Jeremy. That's a really powerful point and an important one. And I think I personally see this sort of start of a conversation in terms of that sort of future master planning and how, and hopefully you found it in a very open and collaborative way in terms of starting that discussion and trying to build up a brief together. And of course, the sort of the communication and engagement is sort of the cornerstone and the foundation of these things. And I hope we've sort of appreciated and enjoyed that about this morning's conversation. We're pretty much at the end of our session, so I would just invite Brian and then Peter, as you introduced, to sort of any last points. But I think just a couple of points of housekeeping in terms of we'll of course write up what we've sort of learned from today, and obviously the film and the comments will be available publicly. And this is, yes, as I say, very much the start of a conversation and a start of communication to sort of collaborate on the future of the area, and the idea of an area-wide strategy is very much understood and supported, I think. Brian, did you have any last words?
Yeah, well, I just wondered, Chris, whether we could rerun the poll, like just ideally what was going to ask people to do as a kind of thought experiment, really. What's the most you could push yourself out of, like, your original position to a place where you'd accept it, but you feel it's more in line with the way the conversation's gone, it's more of a consensus view. So just like that's what that. So okay, it's not maybe exactly what you wanted, but you can see that's the way the conversation's going. You could probably live with it. So this is like what option would we live with on the box? Is it like
I'm going to see what I can do. If I press relaunch, continue.
Thanks, Chris. So
hopefully,
let's ask what's the most you could put up with? It's my engineering question to you.
And we'll certainly make sure that question gets communicated in the poll with the answers. So don't worry.
Yeah, we'll say the different like tone I put on it. Because it's always nice to feel that conversations lead somewhere, and I always believe in some kind of a consensus. Oh, it's going a bit quicker.
We've got much more voting than last time, so
that's great to hear. And I will let Peter finish then after that.
We had 2 minutes last time, so if you can bear with us, we'll do 2 minutes. Try and keep it the same.
Well, yeah, I mean, just like the initial observations are that like more people have shown more ambition towards a kind of city place now. Also, town square's gone up there, so there's quite a lot in the reduced movement camp. So you know, we looked at different ways with the one-way streets, and it did seem quite feasible of tying space off there. City streets gone down a bit, but like people have shown slightly more ambition in the reduction. The connectors gone down. It's kind of almost half to 9%, and the remain the same has kind of gone down as well. So people have shown a little bit more ambition, and we've kind of we're shifting in that kind of healthy approach to some kind of transition, albeit quite a managed one. And still again, the highest one was for the city street. So we trained the movement, improved the place. Seems to be the one coming through. So thanks for that. I think we have shifted somewhat, and I'll leave it to Peter now to share the results. Whatever. Thanks.
Good. Well, thank you very much. Well, thanks everyone for coming, because I think this is just the comments we've heard, but also the comments in the chat panel are really, really helpful. And thank you very much to Chris and Brian for facilitating this. I have to say, I mean, there were so many things here, it's very difficult to really pick on one, but I was struck by the 15-minute city point is a really good good one. I think Peter Hall, who was probably the 20th century's greatest planner after Abercrombie. Yeah, so Peter Hall used to live in Bedford Park, and he always talked about its dendritic planning qualities, which is essentially tree roots which go towards a centre, and the centre is the Turnham Green station and Turnham Green Terrace itself. And I think that's very interesting, because actually if you measure from the top of Abinger Road, it's only 9 minutes walk into Turnham Green Terrace itself. So it actually creates a 9-minute city rather than a 15-minute city. But I think the points that people made about the wider area, really powerful, because I think that clearly if you start constraining traffic movement in Bath Road, for instance, you get then more rat running down Abinger Road, along Addison and Rupert Road, and the wider impact of any changes that happen need to be taken into account. And I thought also the points that Peter Oborne made, particularly about the space outside the station and how you deal with that under the bridge, which has now been enhanced by Karen Liebrich's wonderful maps, but is still a really difficult place to navigate, particularly when you're trying to social distance actually behind the bus stop. But it suggests that actually Turnham Green Terrace has a number of characteristics. Around the station is one, and that connection across to the park and for commuters going over to the other side of Chiswick. You also have the area around the gardens at one end. Then you have a long strip, which actually at the moment traffic speeds up if it's not crowded, and actually makes crossing the street more difficult for pedestrians. that actually the ability, as one of those very nice little diagrams that was shown early on, that those connections across streets are really important. And actually at Turnham Green Terrace, when there's a lot of traffic, is actually not a great street to cross. And being able to cross it is, I think, really important. And then also the fact that you have areas where you have slightly up further towards Chiswick High Road, you have a wider stretch where Starbucks are at the moment, where there is space outside, but you also have, as you can see, with the space which has been wanded off, you might say, there is the sort of space for the sitting out and seats and the pocket parks that were shown in the early presentation. So it's a matter of where these things happen without restricting the access. And I think access is clearly one of the things that has concerned many of the people commenting today, and how one deals with access is absolutely key. And certainly if we have buses going down there at the moment, it clearly has to be accessible to vehicles. How do you deal with numbers of cars, other ways of controlling cars, but allowing access to people who want to shop? I think there are all sorts of issues to look at there. And then just finally, I think the idea of weekend pedestrianisation is a great one, easily trialled, and see how it works. And then if it doesn't, you don't do it. New York, one weekend, they repainted the streets in Times Square, turned it into a pedestrian space. Taxi drivers hated it, but then everybody else loved it. And once it had been in place, only for a few weeks, it realized it would never go back to the polluted and blocked up place that it was before. So I think that there's just so much here today. It's been really, really, I think, positive contributions from people. So thank you very much indeed. What we'll do next is to try and draw some of this together. Come up with some ideas, a brief of things that might be done that would help the issues that have been raised in the discussion. And if everyone here is happy to do so, we'll keep you in touch, and maybe if we can speak to somebody who has a bit of space in an empty unit in the terrace, we could put up some images and ideas that could actually be consulted on by a wider group, and particularly more retailers in Turnham Green Terrace, because we have had some. It would be nice to have more, and we would like to engage them in the conversation as well. And so we see this as something that we would then deliver as, you know, one of the many let's say packages of consultation which will go to the council, but we hope will impact on their thinking in a positive way. So thank you all very much. It's been absolutely fascinating discussion. It's great.
Thank you.
And this has been recorded and will be available on the Facebook page, which is attached to your invitation you had originally.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.